Welcome to DPC Pediatrician. We're Dr. Phil Boucher
and Dr. Marina Capella, two DPC pediatricians who are on a mission to share our love of direct primary care with you. Welcome everyone to another episode of DPC Pediatricians. Phil and I today are going to be talking about whether the grass is really greener in the world of direct pediatric care. That's a question that we got from one of our registrants to the virtual summit happening in September. A great question. We may have touched on it a little bit in a past episode when we were first starting the podcast, but it's been 2.5 years and it's worth touching on this question again because it is definitely one of the most common questions we get from people who are contemplating whether the leap into DPC would be worth it for them. So Phil, I'm curious, maybe you can start us out with your perspective on this question.
So I'm gonna quickly read the question that came in because I think it is really insightful and kind of sets the stage in a good way. This was a person that registered for the virtual summit and said her 12-month goal is to know whether I want to do this or not and have enough information to know if it could suit my life. I currently work 2 to 3 days per week and make $200K per year. So I think I'm really wondering if the grass is actually greener on the other side, despite the frustrations of working for the man, as she put it.
I love it.
So this is a really good question. And I think this is where a lot of people are right now. Like, things are okay. Could I do this for the rest of my career? Well, I'm not really sure, but if I take this leap, is the grass really greener? And I think in the big picture, well, one, first and foremost, I think it is much greener than it was before, despite the things that we talk about, all of the different things related to starting your practice and maintaining your practice and all of the business things that fall much more squarely on your shoulders. I do think the grass is much greener on this side. From the patient side of things, my patients have a lot more time with me. We are able to go into a lot more depth. We're able to handle a lot of hassles or inconveniences a lot easier. And patients stay, which tells me that like they are very satisfied with their care. They send their friends and family. So I think a grass is greener from the patient side. Yes, definitely. From the physician side of things, it's greener for me compared to the work environment that I was in before. I was actually, this is an aside that I wasn't going to share, but I will. Marina's a big reader. I'm a big reader. I track all my reading on Goodreads because I get the dopamine hit of like putting it in and the deadline of I have to read this many books by the end of the year. But I was looking back at my old challenges, and in 2017, I had a book on my list that I read called The No Asshole Rule. And I had to, it made me stop and think, like, at one point in my career, I was spending my time outside of work reading books on how to deal with colleagues because I was surrounded by some. I had some great people that I worked with. I'm not saying that I didn't, but I had some that I had to read books on how to handle them. And so being outside of the system, being outside of the administrative burdens, being outside of people that don't have the same values and don't have the same interests that I do has been so much greener for me. I also have a lot more flexibility and control over my schedule. Last week, our kids were in this camp and I did not realize that there was like a performance on the last day. It was a performing arts camp. Of course, there's going to be a parent performance. If this had been in my traditional practice where I had, 20, 30 patients scheduled, I would have just had to miss it. But I just texted the families and said, hey, I didn't realize my kids are in this performing art performance at 11 o'clock. Would you be able to move up? And they're like, oh my gosh, yes, my niece is in that too. Of course we'll move. The flexibility that it offers is unparalleled. And I think that is one of the things that makes the grass greener for me as well. Is like, I'm done at 4:30 every day, and not just me being done, but our whole team is done at 4:30. And so I'm home making dinner, spending time with my family, not staying late into the evenings, not doing evening meetings because everybody's so busy during the day that we have to do partner meetings in the evenings or things along those lines. So from a lifestyle standpoint, it is much greener as well. And so that's my take on it from the greener side of things. And I would love to hear, Marina, your thoughts around the greener side of things, and maybe we can talk about the dead grass, the browner side of
Exactly. Yeah, because we don't want to give a completely biased perspective. There are challenges. From my perspective, I think it's funny you mentioned books because when I was at the peak of my burnout many years ago, this is about 10 years ago when I was working at a community health center and I started to recognize, oh my God, did I just waste a decade of my life pursuing this training and career that is making me kind of miserable? And is there a way out and all this stuff? And I did eventually work with a burnout coach who helped me to see that I had options, but also I was at a Barnes and Noble like every weekend. And I was reading, finding
Self-help
books
section.
about, yeah, finding books about like motivation. How
Yeah.
is it that my organization is using carrots and sticks to motivate people instead of intrinsic motivation? Things about like a lot of business books, like the Culture Code, Leaders Eat
Hmm.
Last, trying to
Hmm.
understand the dynamics that were happening and that I was observing within the organization to
Mm,
try to make sense of why is this such a sucky place to work? And why is it that
totally.
as a physician who has more education, more training than anyone above me, why is it that my voice is not valued? Right. And
For sure.
then I also attended like a burnout conference and everything. But I think you and I were on parallel tracks trying to use
Parallel
books to
tracks.
make
Yes.
sense, right, of what was going on. But in terms of the grass being greener, for me, the leap has definitely, no question about it, been worth it. It just opens so many doors for me to, first of all, become the kind of pediatrician that I really wanted to be, the kind of physician and an integrative physician that has brought me so much joy. I've had the schedule flexibility to go to a lot of seminars, a lot of conferences, a lot of trainings. And also because of the finances of running a business, you get to run those expenses as a business expense. I mean, is it still
Right.
money? Yes, but it's much less expensive to you when it's going through as a business expense and you're not paying taxes on it, as
Right.
opposed to using your own personal funds to do that. So yes, absolutely. Like I learned so many integrative modalities. I did my fellowship. I've met some really cool people, and I get to practice medicine in a way that I feel truly addresses what healing is, which is wholeness and seeing the whole child, seeing the whole person, seeing the whole family dynamic, right? And getting to the root causes of certain cases, maybe not all cases, but many
Right.
cases where I know that this child has been to physician after specialist after ER, and nobody has asked them the questions that I have the time to ask them
Right.
now. And that's a really beautiful thing. So for me, that alone would have made it worth it. But also, I'm the kind of person I like to have control and autonomy and freedom. And I
Hmm.
really hated practicing medicine within settings where I felt like I had my hands tied behind my back and I had good ideas, but everybody said, no, you can't do that because of this stupid rule. And no, you can't do that because of this stupid restriction or this red tape, or that's
Right.
just not the way we do things. Just fall in line, Marina. Just stop complaining. That was how I felt working for other people, was that I just couldn't shine in the way that I was meant to shine.
Totally.
And yeah, so I agree that the schedule flexibility, totally worth it. The autonomy, totally worth it. The freedom to practice medicine in a truly aligned way, where it's not also it's not just about helping our patients to heal, it's also about healing ourselves. I've been able to really work on dissecting some of the issues that were developed within me through a really toxic system of medical
Hmm.
training and education and early career. And I've been able, through the modalities that I'm learning, also help to heal myself. And so I think in an ideal world, we allow our physicians to be as whole as our patients, right?
Right.
And we facilitate that and it's a symbiotic relationship. The more healed and whole our physicians in society are, the more healed and whole our patients are going to be. So that's my take on that. So I'm curious, Phil, how about for you regarding the browner
Right.
side of the grass, right? Like, what are the downsides?
So just to echo one thing that you said too is I heard so many times before I started my own practice, that's not the way it's always been done. And like just I brought the research, I brought the data to support we should do it this way instead, and just constantly hearing that. And now being in a practice where we get to make decisions on the fly with our small team without having to go through committees, or like we have things that work out, we have things that fail, but we're able to do things because we're willing to take those risks that big organizations, even when I was an owner of the practice, wasn't able to, get any traction behind. I
Yeah.
think on the flip side, what parts of it are less green? Number one, I think it's lonelier. And I think that that is something that people don't realize is like not having all the same colleagues that you previously had and people that have gone through it. You do have to find a way to fill that void of often, especially in pediatric DPC, you're starting solo. Maybe you have one employee or something along those lines, but it's a much different way of practicing when you don't have colleagues that you're seeing, when you don't have somebody that you can bounce something off of. You find ways to do that, and you find communities and groups that will allow you to do that in different ways. But I think that is one thing to keep in mind, and especially because physicians often work so much that like their colleagues become pseudo friends or real friends, but that void requires filling. Otherwise it can be kind of lonely, especially when you are suddenly kind of the boss and also elevated above your employee in terms of responsibility, liability, risk, all of those sorts of things, that it can be a little bit lonely. And then I think along those same lines, that the maybe a lot of this is related to loneliness. You don't have the same support and accountability that comes from having other people that are in it with you and depending on you. And so what that looks like is you have, yes, you have a lot more time, but you have a lot more time that you can dilly dally and waste and not be efficient and then beat yourself up of why can't I just do this? Well, before I had this external accountability of like, eventually somebody's gonna be like, hey, why aren't you signing your notes? Why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? And when you're the boss, that accountability has to come from somewhere up here. Otherwise, things fall behind, things fall through the cracks. You don't have those external kind of scaffolds that are holding you up. And so I think those are two very manageable mountains that have to be considered and taken into consideration as you enter and grow in your career and figuring out how to fill those. And that has been something that has been just a challenge for me to kind of figure out how to make those things happen. And then I think the third thing that, and the last thing that I'll say in terms of the grass being not so green, is you have to figure out how to get new patients. You have to figure out how to get out there, because it's not simply they looked at their insurance card, it said where to find a provider. And so then they went on the website and they found one that was close to their zip code. And then they called around and found somebody that was accepting and they signed up, and they don't know you or anything like that. These are relationship based patients and families. And so it takes more work to get in front of them and to then to talk to them and then to make them understand the model and what you have to offer. And so you have to figure those things out. Again, very figure outable, but something that takes more work than just like putting you're not putting your shingle up. Somebody's putting your placard on the door and they're accepting new patients for you and they're getting you credentialed and insurance and all those other sorts of things that get done. It just requires you to put yourself out there in ways and figure out different ways. Now, obviously this is all very figure outable. There's so many successful pediatricians that have done this that there's no reason that any pediatrician couldn't do that. But those are things that are definitely worth considering that should be taken into account when you're saying, is the grass really greener, or should I stay where I'm at under the frustrations of working for, as this questioner had said, the man. How about you, Marina? What are the things that have been spots in the lawn where it hasn't been quite so green?
Yeah. Well, I think one thing to definitely consider that represents a little bit of a browner spot for me is the tolerance for risk. You have to ask yourself,
Mhm.
what is my risk tolerance? Because any entrepreneur starting a business has to have some tolerance for risk. If you're the kind of person that's just too afraid and is never willing to step out of your comfort zone and is just like, no, 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 the prospect of failing, the prospect of losing money, it's just too much, I can't do it, then it's probably not for you, right? You have to
Right.
have some tolerance for risk. And I definitely felt that those moments of terror in the beginning where I was just seeing the money. I was seeing my bank balance fall further and further
Right.
as I purchased supplies and I set things up. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm hemorrhaging money. And is this money ever going to be recovered? And am I ever going to, I had to visualize paying myself my first paycheck and all of these things just to keep myself motivated that yes,
Right.
this was possible. But the first year I relied on my primary income to keep myself afloat, pay my bills. I was still doing PRN shifts in urgent care. So
Mhm.
for me, I didn't have an established base of patients who knew me in my community. And I was definitely more introverted and shy on the marketing front. And it took me a long time to really figure that out and get more confident in forming the relationships I needed to form with other business owners, in just speaking about my services in a way that wasn't hesitant and didn't start off with, well, I don't take
Right.
insurance. but so that took just some time. And a lot of this is personal development. It's not just about a business checklist, it's about developing yourself as an entrepreneur, as someone who can market yourself, as someone who feels confident about the services that they offer, despite working outside of the insurance model. And that can be hard because a lot of even our colleagues say judgmental things about, like, oh my gosh, why would you not take insurance? And you're just treating
Totally.
rich, entitled families. And that
Right.
can get in our heads, right? So we have to get really good about ignoring some of the negative chatter that's out there, and
For
also
sure.
our own negative mind chatter, and just
Yep.
saying, no, my heart is telling me this is the way to go, and this is a way for me to practice in a more aligned way, and just trust that instead of trust all the fears and all the stuff other people are saying. So that the financial part of it was hard. It
Yeah.
really took about a year to start paying myself, and then I was paying myself very little, and then it took to 2 years to pay myself at least a decent amount where I
Right.
could stop doing urgent care shifts, and then 3 to 4 years to get in a happy space. So I think that that's something that you hear some of those really rapid success stories and you think, okay, if it takes me 6 to 12 months to start making a full salary, I can do that. But
Right.
you have to consider, what if it takes you 2 to 3 years? So you really have
Right.
to ask yourself, what's my risk tolerance? How am I using my savings or creative side gigs or things like that to give myself a longer runway in case it does take me longer? It's better to err on the side of caution than plan for instant success and then be disappointed when it doesn't happen, right?
Right.
And there can be a lot of troubleshooting along the way too. I think the responsibility you alluded to also rings true, that in the beginning, it was just me. So I was also a little lonely, like you said. It was
Hmm.
just me in the office, greeting patients, taking phone calls, figuring out how to centrifuge blood samples and all of that
Right.
stuff, right? And with that also comes a lot of administrative burden. So even
Hmm.
when I'm not seeing patients, I am responsible for making sure my malpractice insurance is paid, making sure my
Right.
licenses are up to date, making sure that, overseeing my team, making sure supplies are ordered, and all of that stuff. So you
Right.
are ultimately responsible for all the business back end stuff. You have to consider that when you're designing your schedule. Am I going to give myself some administrative time that's protected so that it's not like, well, this is my clinical schedule, but I didn't think about all those other administrative responsibilities, and shoot, I didn't make time for them.
Right.
Right. But yeah, I started out, I swerved around a little bit. It was lonely in the beginning. And then I started to hire employees. And now I have 4 employees, and I'm responsible for their paychecks. I'm
Yeah.
responsible for running their payroll. I'm responsible for making sure that we have enough money that everybody gets paid. So there is that level. And then when issues come up, because interpersonal issues can arise, and I have had employees who were just not a good fit and eventually ended up leaving, I have to manage all those interpersonal things
Right.
because my employees come and complain to me, and I am the one
Right.
who has human resources in addition to business administration and CEO and clinician and all of that stuff. So it's responsibility, and not everybody has a lot of employees. Some people really dream of having a micro practice and maintaining a micro practice, whereas other
Hmm.
people really want to grow their team and want to have a little community so that it's not as lonely. And it's up to you what feels optimal for your situation.
Love it. I think those are really good insights into where the grass looks greener, where it doesn't look as green, or maybe it's a little bit more brown. I think that hopefully over the course of all these episodes and the community on Facebook, the virtual summit, the in-person mastermind, like there's a whole community of people that have made the leap and said, yes, the overall grass is much greener despite having to learn all these things. And I think the only things that I would end on are, one, physicians are great learners. And so we have the ability to learn like no one else. And all these other businesses that are starting, the million plus businesses that launch around the country, a lot of them have a lot less flexibility and are taking on a lot more risk than we are, because there is always a way out and another option. Like if you say, like, I'm putting everything into this, but if for some reason you changed your mind, or you had a career pivot, or it didn't work out the way that you were hoping, there's always another physician job out there. And so I always
Mhm.
try and like encourage people like, yeah, well, what's the worst that could happen? Well, I would have to close and then I have to get a different job. Okay, well, does that still seem like it's worth to you? Because those are things that you have the ability to do, like almost no one else in the world when it comes to starting a business, is you have that flexibility and hireability to do that and to keep learning and to figure out how to
Mhm.
do all those sorts of things. So,
Yeah, definitely. I would say one last thing, big things to consider for yourself as to whether the grass would be greener for you. Consider your values. What are your top
right,
values, right? And how are they being met or matched in your current employment situation versus how they would be met or matched in DPC? Consider your risk tolerance, especially financial risk tolerance, but also your risks in terms of like, what if I get patients who are not a good match? Am I going to be comfortable firing them and things like that, right?
yep,
And also your desire to practice creatively. Are you okay in the current system and you're like practicing medicine in a way that feels okay for you, or do you really want to spread your wings more and have
right.
that freedom to practice in the way that you feel is best? So big three topics to consider and ask yourself as you decide for yourself whether the grass would be greener.
Now, if you're like, okay, I'm still not quite sure, or I'm definitely sure, we have a virtual summit coming up September 24th and 25th. The first day is really designed for those that are in the curious or launching phase of their practice, where we have about half a dozen talks on all the various things to take into consideration, what it's actually like in practice. It's a virtual summit, so you don't have to travel anywhere, you don't have to get a babysitter. And we specifically designed it so that you'd have time before and after to catch up on any patient communications, inbox visits, and those sorts of things. If that's of interest to you, it's summit.dpcpediatrician.com to get your ticket. And ticket prices do increase on September 1st. So don't put it off and procrastinate the way that I do for literally everything in life. Just go right now. You can sign up from your phone, you'll get the tickets, and then we will see you at the summit.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Until next time.